Hello, Mr. Barry Loudermilk, who is running for the 11th District U.S. House seat. I'm Trenton Adams, and welcome to the Cherokee County Republican Party candidate interviews. Thank you very much for taking the time out of your campaign to participate in this interview process. We've extended this invitation to all candidates in this race and sourced questions from the CCRP membership. We have found that it has been an asset for voters in making their decision. The video will appear on the Cherokee County GOP website and will be shared on social media. The interview will be shown unedited in its entirety. For the interview, we will ask you a number of questions but can offer no prompting. There are no right or wrong answers, only your answers. We ask each candidate the same questions. If this is all right with you, I'll have everyone introduce themselves and then I'll ask Rick to begin the questions.
Absolutely.
Well, the only other person is me, so I'm Rick Davies, chairman of the party. All right. Are you for or against a national ID card? Please explain your position.
Oh, I'm against the national ID card. I think that's a violation of the Constitution. This is something that the founders, I believe, were adamantly opposed to.
It's a three-part question. What is your position on the Federal Reserve Bank? What is the biggest reform you would make to the Federal Reserve, and how would you achieve this?
Well, I think the first thing we have to do is audit the Federal Reserve Bank, which I've co-sponsored legislation to do that. It has to be open and transparent, and then once the result of the audit is in, then we can take steps to move forward from there. I would like to see us transition away from government control of our monetary system. But again, just like most things, it's not something that can happen overnight. Our system has been so constructed around the way we're operating right now. We need to have a clear path out. But anytime that government actually has influence and control of the value of money, then the government has too much influence and control over the monetary system and the free market.
What is your view of the balance of power in Washington among the executive, judicial, and legislative branches?
It is totally way out of whack of what the Founding Fathers intended it to be. And I know that's kind of a slang term, but that's the best term for it. It is totally out of whack. If you go back and you look at the history from when the Founding Fathers put the Constitution and the balance of powers into place, they understood human nature. They understood that man, when given power, would seek more power. In fact, they referenced Jeremiah 17:9 of the Old Testament, is that man's heart is deceitfully wicked and therefore would seek more power. We had three branches of government, but they're not three equal branches. They always wanted to keep the ultimate power of the Congress, or of the government, in the control of Congress, which is the closest branch. They distributed those three powers to give more checks and balances so that the whole government couldn't become corrupt if one element became corrupt. When you look at the history, the most powerful position in the United States government up until about the 1940s was the Speaker of the House. John Quincy Adams served in the House of Representatives after he was president, and he felt that was a more honorable position because that was the position that represented the people. We have abdicated that power away from Congress. We no longer have a power of the purse. We only control about 35% of federal spending today. 65% of it is on autopilot, which is in the mandatory spending, such as Social Security and Medicare and entitlement programs. We have to gain control of that. Another aspect of it is our regulatory agencies have, in effect, become a fifth branch of government. We could defund the EPA today, but they would still operate because they're assessing their own fines, fees, permits. That revenue is going right back into the EPA to be spent. So we have lost the power of the purse in this nation. Senator Mike Lee and I started what we call the Article 1 project several months ago. And that is to focus our attention on the root of the problem, is that regaining Article 1 powers given to Congress, which says all legislative powers. The powers given to Congress to control the other branches is the investigatory and oversight power, the power of the purse, and the power of impeachment. We are beginning to use the investigative and oversight more aggressively, as it should be used. I am actively seeking to impeach the IRS commissioner. Right now, we're working on that. But the third, the power of the purse, we have to get that back. And so through the Article 1 project, we are working to bring back that power. One of the things that we have done is I've introduced a balanced budget amendment. It's more than just a balanced budget amendment because Section 8 of that would reach out and grab all revenues that come to the federal government go to the Treasury to be appropriated by Congress, which means if the EPA finds someone, they don't keep that money. It goes to the Treasury to be appropriated by Congress as the way that the Founding Fathers set it up. I believe we can get there, and I believe we have to get there, and that's going to be the key to getting America back on track is the Congress gaining its constitutional authority once again.
The executive branch has more than 60 armed bureaucracies, including the EPA, Department of Education, and the USDA. Yet the Constitution makes no mention of a federal police force.
Right.
Please explain your position on the armed federal agencies controlled by the executive branch.
Well, I'm actually working with one of the representatives from Utah. The legislation that he put in the last Congress that we're working on doing again this Congress would basically de-arm all these federal regulatory agencies. Why does the EPA have a SWAT team? There's no reason. No reason. Why? The National Institute of Standards and Testing has a law enforcement. They're paying about $40 million a year for federal law enforcement under the National Institute of Standards and Testing. Okay, these are the people that make sure that an ounce is an ounce and a pound is a pound. Why do they need a police force? In our Science and Technology Committee, and I chair the Oversight Subcommittee, we have been aggressively investigating abuse, waste of government money, bringing more transparency. And we found out that not only are they spending $40 million in this one agency on a police force, one of their police officers was going into their laboratories at night and cooking meth. I mean, it's Breaking Bad in real time, real life. This is the type of thing that happens when you don't have control of your government. We're actively seeking that. It is my position that we have federal law enforcement in the FBI. We have the U.S. Marshal Service. If the EPA has a legitimate issue, and there are too many of our regulations can be enforced criminally to start with. We need to pull back on how many of those regulations can be enforced criminally. But if there is an issue that the EPA has with somebody here, they should go to the local sheriff and bring the sheriff in. If it is a federal issue, they can go to the FBI.
What gun control laws and policy do you support?
Being able to keep that dot on that target is the best gun control that I know of. That you know how to bring that weapon out of your holster and point it down range and not hurt anybody else. The Constitution is clear, in my opinion, and we're a long way from being where our Founding Fathers intended us to be, and we have to get back there. The Constitution is not an empowering document, it's a limiting document. I mean, the proof is in the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law. That's a limiting authority. The Second Amendment is as clear. I believe that the people have that the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The word infringed, when you go back and look at the way that the language was used in the colonial period, which was the way their Founding Fathers intended us to interpret the Constitution, not as language we understand it today. The word infringed meant that you couldn't even pass anything that may not directly keep you from obtaining and having a firearm, but indirectly make it more difficult to get one. That's what the word infringed meant. It didn't mean to directly a law to tell you you can't have a weapon. It meant you couldn't even have a law that indirectly, such as a high tax on brass or a high tax on gunpowder, that in effect would keep you from your ability to keep and bear arms. In my estimation, the federal government has a very, very, very limited role in any regulation or law regarding the right to keep and bear arms, and that should only, in fact, it's more of a state's issue according to our Founding Fathers. And as far as gun control, the only measures that I see that the federal government has is dealing with foreign arms trade.
Would you support a federal law permitting the right to carry a firearm across state lines?
Can you repeat the question again?
Yes, sir. Would you support a federal law permitting the right to carry a firearm across state lines?
Well, that's an interesting question because there's several aspects to that, and on the surface, yes. But again, is that a role of the federal government? In fact, I've co-sponsored legislation after a lot of thought about reciprocity with carry permits. because this is one of those areas that are you getting into the area that you're crossing a 10th Amendment issue. Because Georgia, we have a carry permit. I have a Georgia firearms license. When Georgia legislature worked very hard to loosen those, to make it where you can carry more places. South Carolina's is different. South Carolina requires training. Georgia does not. We don't have reciprocity with South Carolina because they won't give reciprocity to Georgia because we don't require training. And I am not an advocate for required training. So do you get to the point where federal legislation is then stepping on the toes of another state who has their own requirements? That's the argument I think we have on this. I ended up co-sponsoring the legislation because I think when you start looking at a constitutional issue, the federal government can have a role of saying, here is the groundwork of which that you can require reciprocity, and then the states work out the differences between the states. But again, it's one of those areas where you start getting into constitutional area that it's not a conflict, but you have to go back to the spirit and the intent of the Constitution, as Thomas Jefferson said.
Would you support immigration reform that includes securing the United States borders?
Yes. In fact, I'm a co-sponsor and helped write the Secure Our Borders First Act, which was one of the first bills we passed out of the Homeland Security Committee, which I serve on the Homeland Security Committee. But what we have to do with the border is, I've spent a lot of time on the border. I've spent 2 trips on the border, one in the state legislature and one in Congress, where we spent the last trip, we spent 4 days riding along with Border Patrol agents, as well as spending time with the ranchers, with no government officials around. The one common theme that we heard all through everywhere from San Diego to the high desert in Arizona to the Rio Grande in Texas, physical barriers do not work when they're alone. There are areas it makes no sense to build a wall or a fence in the middle of the desert. We were taken to an area where you got to understand that whole area is run by cartels. It's not your ones and twos, family members coming across to find a better life here in the United States. These are criminal cartels that are transporting weapons, human cargo, drugs, and this big business for them. They're high tech. They have high paid engineers. They have engineers that were trained here in America to help build tunnels. As one rancher said, you come down here, you build a 12-foot wall, the 13-foot ladder business skyrockets in Mexico. You have to have a combination of solutions from technology, physical barriers such as walls, or actually let me say fences, because the one thing everyone told us there is where we do build a physical barrier, do not build a wall, do not build anything that we cannot see through and see what's on the other side. The ranchers told us this, the people who lived along the border, as well as the Border Patrol agents, because those cartels can and do often hide on the other side and toss grenades or IEDs over the fence. They want to see what's on the other side. But we have to take it sector by sector. In the middle of the desert, there's no reason to have a fence, because even if you see somebody coming over the fence, you're not going to get there in time. What you need is technology to detect when the cartels are moving closer to that area, when they're going to come across. Even if they do come across, you have hundreds of miles of desert, the ability to detect and actually intercept is much greater. So in the high population areas, yes, we need a physical barrier. In the remote areas, we need more technology. We're using drones pretty effectively right now. We're using aerostat radars, night vision that are up on blimps that are actually looking in. But the biggest problem we have is we don't have enough boots on the ground. All of this is determined by having enough Border Patrol agents, which we can't put enough there right now, but we can supplement with National Guard troops. And part of what this Secure Our Borders First bill does is it takes it sector by sector. It uses the combination of technology, physical barriers, as well as the authorization for the government to use National Guard troops under the authority of the governors to secure the border on a rotating basis. Those are the types of things that's going to happen, but none of this is going to be effective until we reverse the president's catch and release program, DACA, DAPA, and his executive overreach. But one thing you have to understand, in Congress there are jurisdictional boundaries in each committee. The Secure Our Borders bill is under the jurisdiction of the Homeland Security Committee. immigration policy is under the Judiciary Committee. We expect to see in fact, we're rewriting a border bill in the next couple of weeks that I'm actually participating in helping writing. But we also have to see the Judiciary Committee move on legislation to end catch and release, to make sure that when someone is caught, they are immediately sent back and they don't get 3 strikes, you're out anymore. And so those two are going to have to come simultaneously if we are effectively going to secure the southern border.
What is an inalienable right?
An alienable right, if you go back and you look at the word inalienable, alienable was actually a business term in the colonial period. You have to go back and understand the languages, the American language as it was understood in the colonial period. Noah Webster wrote the 1828 dictionary for one explicit purpose, as he says in the intro, so you can effectively understand our founding documents. The word alienable was a business term, which meant to transfer. It meant it could be transferred. For instance, if I wanted to sell you property, I would alienate the title of that property to you. So if a piece of land was alienable, it meant it could be transferred. Unalienable means it can't be transferred. When you go back and look at the philosophies of the Founding Fathers, they had a philosophy that was known of rights and powers. It's spelled out in our both the Constitution and the Declaration. The Declaration talks about God created man and he gave them rights. All right? Rights are not transferable. They're alienable. Rights are only given to people. When we talk about states' rights, that's actually an oxymoron, because states cannot have rights. Only people are given rights. States are given power. The other aspect of rights and powers is power, and the power that you have is the ability to defend your rights. So under the philosophy of the Founding Fathers is that upon creation, God gave every person right and power. Rights are not transferable, powers are. And that's why we create civil government, or as the Pilgrims said, a civil body politic. The 10th Amendment lays that out. God gave us power. We transfer that power to the state government, and that power is the authority that comes from us to defend our rights. Then the state governments transferred a portion of that power to create the federal government. That's why when you read the 10th Amendment, it's almost in a reverse process. It says the powers not granted to the federal government are reserved to the states or to the people respectively, because that's the line of secession. We were given the power by God. We gave it some to the state. The state gave it to the federal government. That's why we can always take it back. All right? Unalienable means cannot be transferred, which means we're the end. The buck stops here. The people have rights. Government does not have rights because we cannot transfer it. So when you ever see the term inalienable rights, it is a right that is specifically given to every person, regardless of age, race, color, religion. All men are created equal, and it cannot be taken, it cannot be transferred, nor can they be denied.
The right to life is a core principle of Republican Party values. What are your exceptions and why?
The only exception that I believe in is with the life of the mother. And this is why. I do not want to give government any power to decide which life to take. If it comes down to the actual decision that either the baby's life or the mother's life, both cannot be saved, the government should not be given the authority to make that decision, ever. That should be a decision between the family, the mother, the dad, and the doctor. But predominantly the mother and the dad. If without that exception, you would be, look, a difficult decision like that, the last thing you want is the parents to be afraid of being brought up on charges of murder. If they chose to save the life of the baby, would it be asinine to bring the father up on charges of murder because he decided, let's save the life of the baby instead of his wife? That would never happen. We also shouldn't have the same thing happen on the other side. If they do decide to save the life of the mother, then they should not be brought up on charges of abortion, because it is of illegal abortion should it be made illegal. My issue is empowering the government to make a decision on life. That should always be with the parents.
Public office is not a career, but a calling to represent American citizens. Will you sponsor a House bill to abolish congressional retirement?
this is what right now I can't even tell you what the congressional retirement is because I'm sure I participate, but it this is one of those things that I have to take a look at because you're right, it should not be a career. What I think we need to do though is make the retirement system, because a lot of times you have people like myself who was a business owner. In the business field, as a small business owner, I didn't have a big 401k system. I mean, quite often I'm just trying to make a paycheck. Of course, my employees got paid first, and what was left I would take pay out of, and if I could put away for retirement, I would do it. We do need to have a system to where when you're in Congress, you're working, you're laboring, you should not have to postpone or pause in savings to go away from retirement. Is to have a system that's transferable, that while you're in Congress, you can actually have contributions made to a 401k or a transferable type system. And when you leave, you can transfer that with you when you go. I don't think you punish someone because of service. It's same thing with state service or whether you're on a school board. I don't think you should be punished for doing that. But at the same time, I don't think that you should have a so-called perk that isn't available to anybody else out in corporate America. I can tell you right now that the average time of members of the House is somewhere about 10 to 12 years. And it's usually the conservatives that only stay that long, because most of us in the conservative cause are there for a purpose. And we know when we've kind of hit our limit and it's time to turn it over. Some of them just get frustrated and say, I'm done with this. But yeah, there shouldn't be a retirement system that encourages people to stay in public service that long. But I don't think that we need to just strip something to punish, because what you're going to end up doing is, you want to entice, especially people in business, to go and maybe serve 2, 3, 4 terms in Congress to bring that type of knowledge and intellectual property to Congress. That's some of our most effective guys. And so I think we need to have a system in place that they can continue doing what they were doing.
Do you support congressional term limits, and why or why not?
This is a debate that we've been going through for quite some time, and I see both sides of it. At this point in time, yes, I think that there is a need for term limits. The question is, and the debate is, what is the right amount of time? The founders had this debate. But you go back and you look, John Adams, he was an opponent of term limits because he saw it as government control. The government telling you who you can't vote for. That was more government control over the people. Thomas Jefferson, on the other hand, which you would think these guys were opposite in their philosophy, Thomas Jefferson thought that you needed frequent rotation. That because the temptation to become corrupt. Also, if you think of it back then, these guys didn't live a long time. And so you had to be 35 years old to serve in the Senate. Your lifespan was only into the late 40s. Early 50s was living long back then. So they never anticipated that people would make a career out of the service. We've seen a change in technology. Then they were a long way from home. Communication was slower. Okay, so there was more ability to be corrupt. There was less transparency. Today, I jump on a plane in an hour and a half. I'm in Washington, D.C., which allows me to come home every weekend. It allows me to be back in the district more. So technology has basically opened up the process, but also we're living longer and people tend to serve more. We do know that government is corrupt, that the power has corrupted. The argument then is, what is the right term limit? The problem we have right now, until we rebalance the powers, the balance of powers, the executive branch and the regulatory branches are running government. We saw this in this unique dynamic in Arkansas. Arkansas put in term limits that were 8 years. What happened is they lost all their institutional knowledge of the elected people. And in fact, the Speaker of the House became Speaker of the House. He was the youngest Speaker of the House in the nation. Why? Because the 8-year term limit got rid of everybody else. He had been there 6 years, so he served his one term as Speaker and was gone. The end result was the bureaucrats and the appointed people in government, the unaccountable appointed ones, are now running Arkansas. So if your term limits are too small, you further empower the bureaucrats that are over-empowered right now. If they're too long, then what you end up is, the the career politician as it's been known. So I do believe that we need to have term limits. I've told our folks up there are natural term limits here. When you walk down the hall of the Capitol and you see the paintings and you see the sculptures and you see the artwork that's paying homage to those who gave so much and their vision for this nation, and you're no longer inspired, well, you've been there too long. But I do think we do have to have some type of term limit. I think in the House, 12 years is the minimum. If we were to go less than 12 years, especially when you're dealing with, especially if we're talking about rolling in even more of the authority that has been abdicated to the executive branch and the regulatory branches, if we bring more of that back where it belongs in Congress, it is even that much more important to have some institutional knowledge there. So should there be term limits? That's up to the American people. I think we ought to, and up to Congress, whether we put those in. I think it is constitutionally sound. Some say that it's unconstitutional. I think it is constitutionally sound, but the argument has to be what is the right amount of a time of term limits.
Have you read the current Republican Party platform adopted at the 2012 RNC Convention, and if so, what principle best describes you?
Yes, I've read it. I just started reading over it again recently because we are coming up on another convention, and I think our platform is a pretty solid platform. When you look at which plank of the platform best describes me, I think if you take the phrase, a constitutional conservative with traditional American values, I think that incorporates most of what the Republican Party platform still stands for. We have look, one of the opportunities I have in Congress is to actually preside over the House of Representatives. I probably presided 30 times already. A lot of times it's at night during late night debates, sometimes during the day when we have heated debates, but especially in those evening times. When it's more solitude, I get a chance to be there while we're managing the debates and just kind of scan across the architecture in there and think of the history that's there. Well, there's effigies all around the room, but there's only one effigy, and they're all great lawgivers, those that have affected law throughout not just the nation, but throughout the entire world and world history. But there's only one effigy looking right at you, and it's Moses. So he's looking directly at the speaker's rostrum, and if you go back from what I said earlier, up until the mid-1940s, the Speaker of the House was the most powerful position in the United States during peacetime. That Speaker of the House was arguably the most powerful position in the entire world. The reason Moses is looking at you is to remind you of what our founders called the natural law. That regardless of how powerful this nation is, there is a law that is superior to and supersedes man's laws. One of the effigies in there is of Sir William Blackstone, and Blackstone is who Jefferson quoted when he talks about the laws of nature and of nature's God. And Blackstone spoke about this natural law is always superior to whatever man's laws does. And so we have a moral standard, a moral code in this nation that we have always abided by, that regardless of what opinion the Supreme Court makes, regardless of what Congress does, regardless of what the President does, that moral code is still there, it is still sound, it's everything that we have built this nation upon. But when you take the Constitution as the law of the land, that is that barrier that we cannot violate, and bring in those traditional American values, and I'm talking about values not just morality, but moral values such as hard work, getting government out of the way so we can excel as Americans, getting government off your back and let you make a mistake. What's wrong with making mistakes? You learn from your mistakes. Why are we bailing people out? Well, what happens if a child makes a mistake and the parents always bail them out? They never learn to do anything different. Part of a great American society is not only the freedom to succeed, but the freedom to fail. And that's what I think that we've been missing in this nation.
Do you believe money has a corrupting influence in politics? And if so, what steps should be taken to curb it?
Yeah, I mean, you go back to the scriptures. It's not the money, but it's the love of money. And I think that the money is a definite problem in politics today, but it's the way that the money is handled. Look, running for office is expensive. We all know that it's extremely expensive. And that's part of the campaigning. your ability to go out and raise money, get support. You look at our supporters throughout the years have mostly always come from, our contributions range from $5 to $5,000. We usually have more of the $5 and $25 and $100 donors than most of the other candidates out there. I've never been a big dollar guy. I usually my bank account and my campaign account some of the lowest in Congress. In fact, one of the things I guess I was told to be proudest of, I'm ranked in the top 25 of the poorest members of Congress. But that's due from being 20 years of a small business owner in an environment where the government is opposed to the advancement of small business. Money does corrupt. The love of money does corrupt. But money can be handled if it is transparent. I have always held that the more that government tries to control, the more that government tries to legislate, the more that government tries to manage, the more corruption there will be. I think we should remove the limits, all the controls, the constraints, and have 100% transparency. That's the best. Let the people decide. Just be fully transparent with everything you do. And I would say in the federal government we're much more transparent because of the laws that we have than in the state government. Now the state's getting there, but we also have more ethics laws that create more problems. We spend as much time just trying to say that we dot an I and cross a T properly because, look, you can be fined for filling a form out wrong. So I think what we need to do is lessen the boundaries, especially with campaign finance, and bring more transparency. When it comes to money in government, bring all that, as I said earlier, back under the control of Congress to be appropriated. We uncovered, when it comes to corruption of money in government, part of our oversight subcommittee on science, space, and technology, we uncovered in the National Science Foundation where a senior executive had retired. But the last thing he did before he retired was to write a contract for himself. He retired, came back 2 weeks later with a 400% pay increase and a home paid for by the federal government doing the same job that he was doing before. This is the type of problems that you resolve when you bring all that back under the control of Congress.
For over 40 years, women have had the legal protection to seek an abortion. Many object to this, citing religious belief. Do you believe that it is acceptable as a policymaker to cite your religious beliefs in crafting social policy that affects Americans of all faiths?
Well, I think it depends on how you define your religious beliefs. Yes, I think you should use your principles, regardless of whether they're driven by your belief of the Constitution, your belief in God. I think that is, you're expected that be a driver. That's why when we campaign, we let people know where we stand. Either these ideas line up with what you believe or they do not. When it comes to the life issue, that is not just a religious issue. That is a constitutional issue. Sir William Blackstone wrote the commentary on the common law, which, as I stated earlier, that Thomas Jefferson cited. He and our founding fathers were scholars. When you see in the Declaration of Independence, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, those are not individual liberties because the document says that among these are life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Those are categories. Those categories came from Blackstone's commentary on the common law, which is still today the de facto law in American jurisprudence. If there is not a law covering a situation or a case, which is hardly the case anymore with 4,500 criminal laws on the book, but if there is the case in civil or criminal that is not covered by law, we go back to Blackstone's commentary on the common law. That's how widely accepted it is. William Blackstone said the three categories of inalienable rights are life, liberty, and property. We interpret those life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. In the beginning of his commentary on life, he said that life is the most basic gift that God has given to man. And it is the most basic protection given to government. And that protection of life begins at the first sign of life, which is quickening in the womb. That's when they first knew life, when they could feel the baby move. Our founding fathers, John Quincy Adams, wrote specifically that the order in which life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness was written was in hierarchical order. That the job of the protecting life by government begins at the first sign of life. So it is the responsibility of government to protect that life against even a decision of a mom. And government, from the very foundation of this government, says that life is superior to liberty. Liberty is second in that list. Yes, a woman has a right to her own body. I won't deny that. I mean, but will I ever be in that position? No. But I have a right to my own body as well. But that life supersedes any choice that you make for your own body. So when it comes to the right to life, that isn't just a religious choice. That is a fundamental constitutional government choice if you believe in those basic three inherent rights.
Last year, the Supreme Court issued an opinion legalizing gay marriage. Are you okay with this? And if not, what steps are you willing to take to reverse this?
And I'm glad you said it the way you did, because I've heard the news media say that the Supreme Court issued a decision, the Supreme Court issued a ruling. The Supreme Court did not issue either. It issued an opinion. That was an opinion of 5 justices in the United States that I heard one attorney general say, well, this is now the law of the land. When I read the Constitution says there's only one branch of government can make law, and that's the legislative branch. All legislative powers are granted to the Congress. The courts cannot. They cannot make law. So no, it is not the law of the land. It is an opinion. I had the fortune to have dinner with Antonin Scalia a few months ago. What a great opportunity. There were just a handful of constitutional conservatives that he invited to go to dinner with him, and we were discussing this. I disagree with that opinion, but I also think that government should not have a hand in marriage. I don't think the federal government should have a hand. That should be something that has always been left. Marriage is a religious institution. I don't think that government should be involved in the licensing whatsoever. It should be something that the government backs itself out of. It would save a lot of time. It would save a lot of trouble. It would, and that should be something that is totally left to the church or the religious institution to issue marriage licenses. That's the way it was in the founding of our nation, and I think it's best fit if government is not involved at all.
What is the single most important reform besides repealing Obamacare that needs to be made to get our fiscal house in order?
Restoring Article I powers. Reforming the culture in Congress, that's one thing that we have been working. One of the first things I did when I got into Congress was to help form the House Freedom Caucus. And the number one issue for the House Freedom Caucus was changing the culture in Washington, D.C., mainly changing the process and the procedures. Unless we change that, we're never going to get anything accomplished. Now, what we have done so far, one, we forced a change in leadership. One of the actual first official vote that I made was to vote against John Boehner as Speaker when the Republicans met in November to determine who our nominee would be. That was our primary election. When we got to the floor, myself and most of the other conservatives on the House Freedom Caucus, we voted for John Boehner to block any chance of Nancy Pelosi becoming Speaker, which would have been a worse disaster. But we never stopped our reforms, our search for reforms. Boehner would not change from a top-down approach to empower congressmen like myself to bring new ideas forward. So we worked diligently to bring in new reforms and ended up forcing the Speaker of the House, a historic moment. October 29th, he left. We brought in Paul Ryan as Speaker, who was dedicated to changing the rules that govern the House back to what the Founding Fathers intended, which means if I have an idea, I shouldn't be limited by what committee I'm on or kiss someone's ring who happens to be in power to get blessed to move a bill forward. If you have a good idea and you're willing to work, you're willing to move that thing forward, you get that through committee, you should be able to bring it to the floor for a vote. Since we have changed that process, I've actually been able to pass 3 bills, which is, I've been told there's people that have been there for 12 and 14 years that have not passed a single bill. Well, they were trapped in that old system, but as soon as we were released by changing this whole system, immediately we were ready to move. We had ideas and we took advantage of it and moved it forward. So reforming Washington, D.C. in the way that we operate the House, which we are doing, now the Senate has to change. The Senate has to get rid of the rules that are governing them and go back to what the Founding Fathers intended. They need to change the cloture rule and go back to a traditional filibuster. If you want to stop a bill, filibuster is inherent. It's part of what the Founding Fathers intended. But you need to get your lazy rear end down to the podium and speak for 24 hours if you want to kill a bill, not just hide behind 13 of your other colleagues and sign a resolution to stop it. We need to get back to what the Founding Fathers intended for the Constitution, the Founding Fathers intended for the way we operate. Then we'll be able to reinstitute our Article I powers.
Would you vote to re-elect Paul Ryan as Speaker? If not, please give us the name of the person you see as most fit to hold the office.
It's to be determined. Right now, Paul Ryan has done everything that we expected him to do, that he told us that we would do. We went with Paul Ryan not because of his conservative credentials. When you look at it, he's a pretty conservative guy. There's some things we definitely disagree on. But at the same time, he was committed to changing that culture, to changing the rules. We have been going in the right direction. If we continue to go in the direction we're going, and we're making progress, and the conservatives are still at the table negotiating, yes, I'll support him for Speaker. But we're still in that honeymoon period. And we'll see how it is at the end of the year. But I can tell you this, under John Boehner, every decision was made, and it was brought to us and says, this is the decision I've made. You're either with me or you're not. That's a binary decision. Under Paul Ryan, the conservatives, House Freedom Caucus members, have been brought to the table. And the reason we haven't agreed upon a budget is because we're actually at the table negotiating. There's a $30 billion difference we have. We need to cut $30 billion out. And what we're negotiating is how is the best way to do that. And it isn't that we can't get there, it's that we're actually negotiating. And this is how the changing of the culture is going to take a little bit of time, because the whole system up there was predicated upon one person making the decision. Now that we've actually gone back to the way that the Founding Fathers intended it, it's going to take time to get this thing streamlined again. But as long as Paul Ryan continues to work with the conservatives, I spent 2 hours in his office just recently negotiating the budget, as long as we are there at the table and we can continue to move to the right, then I think he should continue to be as Speaker of the House.
Do you support a balanced budget amendment?
Not only do I support balanced budget amendment, I have introduced the most stringent balanced budget amendment in the House of Representatives. We introduced it last month. Not only does it require a balanced budget, it requires, which is 18% of the GDP, and I think that's the way you do it, which is really a spending control as well as balanced budget. It's going to take us a while to get there. If we were to try to balance the budget overnight, we'd collapse the economy. We all know that. But one thing that I've noticed is, even before I got to Congress, it's ever since Republicans took control, we would pass a budget that balanced the budget within 10 years. The next year, they would pass a budget that balanced the budget within 10 years. The next year, pass a budget that balanced the budget within 10 years. But it never got to 9, 8, 7, 6. It was always a sliding window. Our balanced budget amendment requires that it be done in 10 years from ratification. It builds a backstop. It does give us that time to get there, which we can do. We can do, and we still have time to do it if we react quickly. It also requires that there be a supermajority to raise taxes. It requires a supermajority to go in debt. Our Founding Fathers allowed for there to be debt because they understood there's times that government needs to do that. Because if you don't allow government to go into debt, then the government will become hoarders of the people's money. And they'll keep too big of rainy day funds, and they'll keep money out of the hands of the people. We need to be able to go into debt in short periods of time, and when we do have surpluses, it needs to go back to the people in the forms of tax reduction. Right now, any surplus we get needs to go to pay off a $19 trillion debt. Our balanced budget amendment does allow for us to go into debt during times of emergency, wartime, natural disaster, but it doesn't limit it to that. It simply says upon a 2/3 vote of both houses, a supermajority, then we can go in debt. But that debt then has to be turned around and paid off. And then the other aspect of it is, as I mentioned earlier, taking all revenues that come into the federal government to go to the Treasury to be appropriated by Congress. So you no longer have these rogue agencies collecting their own fees. And so, yes, not only do I support balanced budget amendment, I have introduced one, and we are working very hard now to bring this thing to a floor for a vote.
How do you plan to reduce corporate inversions?
we're working on that right now. There's multiple plans that we're looking at. I just had a briefing on some of these the other day of the multiple plans. We have to negotiate or navigate those waters very carefully because of just the nature of where we are in Congress today. So that's something that really, let me go back and look at the plans of where we are. That's not being on Ways and Means or the Judiciary Committee. My focus has been mostly on national security issues. But through the House Freedom Caucus, we have members that specialize in different areas. And so one thing I've learned, if you don't have a clear answer on it, then go and get the details and get back. So,
do you support the popular vote or the Electoral College?
the Electoral College. The Founding Fathers understood the importance of the Electoral College. You know, Congress is the only branch that you're directly elected by popular vote. The president is not via the Electoral College, and even our as we are all becoming more aware, if you didn't already know, even our convention system through the major parties is not through a popular vote, but through a delegate system. The reason I support the Electoral College is for the same reason the founders did. If you did not have that to disperse the ideology that predominates throughout America, your major population centers would always control who is the President of the United States, meaning New York City, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Atlanta, Georgia, Houston, Texas. The ideology of those cities, which are generally pretty liberal, would always select who the president is. Through the Electoral College, it more weighs that balance to where you get rural, which is more sparsely populated, actually have the ability to weigh in as well. And I think going to a popular vote for presidency would actually be contrary to what we're trying to achieve.
What have you done in the last year to save money at work and at home?
Personally, what have I done to save money at work and home? I do a lot of my own work around the house. I cut my own grass. I do most of the carpentry work around the house. We ride a bicycle places. In Washington, D.C., I don't even have a car. We walk everywhere we go. We're very frugal with our money. At work, we're very cautious with how we spend the people's money because we do have a budget. We operate on a shoestring budget because my idea is that we need to be very, very wise with how we spend the government's money. And so in every aspect of our lives, I'm looking at value of investment versus outcome. And quite frankly, when you're a tightwad like myself, you look for every way that you can save money, but also make sure you're getting your value out of it.
Are you currently a member of your local county Republican Party?
Yes, I am. And I have been since 1995.
We would like our elected Republican leaders to help us grow the party. Please briefly describe any significant efforts you have made in the past to support the Republican Party and/or Republican candidates locally, statewide, or nationally.
Oh, like I said, that's been going on since 1995 when I first moved back to Georgia after being in the military and working abroad. Moved back, got involved in the Republican Party, and around 2000 became the chairman of the Bartow County Republican Party. I don't think I have missed a county convention or a district convention since then. I actually got involved in politics by helping candidates. Our state rep, Jeff Lewis from Bartow County, was the first candidate that my family went door to door in his campaign. We have continued that even when I ran for the state house. If the one time I didn't have an opponent, we went out and helped others. We've continued to do that as well. I just did our district convention here, which was, I was counting as about my 15th district convention that I've done throughout the years. It's an important process that we should be involved in. It's harder to make a lot of the meetings now because I'm in Washington so much. But when we're in town, we try not to miss one of the GOP meetings and a lot of the external activities. But I think the real aspect of it is being involved with boots on the ground. When I won the runoff election last year, we didn't have a general election. So I had a time that I could have taken vacation, but we didn't. We kept our team in place, and we traveled around helping other conservative candidates that were challenging Democrats. We took a busload of our volunteers down to Panama City, Florida, to help Steve Sutherland, who had a very contentious general election race, and we went door to door with him. We went out to Augusta to help Rick Allen, who was running against a Democrat. Made phone calls and went door to door for Rick Allen. But also called around to a lot of the organizations that support me, Freedom Works, Club for Growth, Family Research Council, and I asked, give me a list of the candidates, good conservative candidates that we need to help. And we went out and raised money for those candidates and helped send and sent them money as well. So that whole thing that drove me first to get involved in the Republican Party, we're still doing today even while I'm in Congress.
Last two tough questions. Have you ever been arrested or convicted of a crime excluding traffic offenses?
No.
And have you ever been the subject of professional discipline or cited for breach of ethics or unprofessional conduct by any disciplinary committee, court, administrative agency, or other professional?
No, I have not.
Thank you very much. Is there anything else you'd like to say to the viewers?
I'll just say that in the 1 year that I have been in Congress, I think we've done a lot. My goal was to reform and challenge the status quo and bring reforms to Washington, D.C. We've worked very hard at doing that. We have forced a change in leadership. We have uncovered a lot of wasteful spending. In fact, the Citizens Against Government Growth has ranked me the most effective member of all the members of the House of Representatives, #1, at fighting and reducing government waste. We want to continue these reforms. It's going to take us a while to get there, and I'm just asking for you to send me back to Washington so that we can complete the mission. We are not going to be able to do it overnight. It's going to take a while. But I want to make sure that we continue this fight, continue the direction we're going, especially with a Republican president in office, that we can have a year of reforms. 2017 can be a year of reforms like we've never seen before to get us back in the direction we're going. Because our children deserve better than what we're passing along to them. And my objective is that they have a nation that's free, safe, and full of opportunity. And I really, really would appreciate your vote on May 24th.